Deep within the emerald hills of ancient Sri Lanka stands a towering monolith of red stone that pierces the sky like a dagger thrust from the earth itself. This is Sigiriya, the Lion Rock, and atop its summit lie the haunting ruins of what was once the most magnificent palace fortress ever conceived by mortal hands. But this is not merely a story of architectural triumph. This is the tale of a king whose paranoia and ambition created one of history's most spectacular rises to power, only to orchestrate his own catastrophic downfall. King Kashyapa, who ruled from 477 to 495 AD, stands as one of the most complex and controversial monarchs in world history. Unlike the great emperors of Rome or the pharaohs of Egypt who inherited their thrones through bloodline, Kashyapa seized his crown through an act so shocking that it would haunt him for the rest of his reign. His story is one of fratricide, artistic genius, military innovation, and ultimately a tragic end that would echo through the centuries. The name Kashyapa has become synonymous with both magnificence and madness. He transformed a barren rock into a wonder that rivals the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, created frescoes that still captivate visitors 15 centuries later, and engineered defensive systems so advanced they seem almost supernatural. Yet this same man lived in constant terror of retribution, constructing his palace not as a symbol of power, but as an elaborate fortress to protect himself from the consequences of his own actions. What drives a prince to murder his own father? What compels a king to abandon the traditional seat of power and retreat to an isolated rock in the wilderness? The answers lie in a web of palace intrigue, religious conflict, and personal demons that would make even the most seasoned political observers recoil in horror. Kashyapa was born into the royal house of Anuradhapura during the height of Sri Lankan civilization. His father, King Kashyapa, was a powerful monarch who had successfully repelled invasions and brought prosperity to the island kingdom. The royal court was a place of splendour and learning, where Buddhist monks mingled with Hindu priests and scholars from India and China shared knowledge with local intellectuals. But beneath this veneer of prosperity lurked the eternal curse of royal succession. Kashyapa was not the designated heir to the throne. That honour belonged to his younger half-brother, Moggallana, whose mother held higher status in the royal hierarchy. This arrangement, while legally sound, planted seeds of resentment that would eventually bloom into something far more sinister. Contemporary chronicles describe Kashyapa as a man of extraordinary intelligence and artistic sensibility. He possessed a keen understanding of architecture, hydraulic engineering, and military strategy. Yet these same sources hint at a darker side to his character, a growing obsession with power and an increasing paranoia about threats to his position. The turning point came when King Kashyapa made it clear that Moggallana would indeed inherit the throne. Rather than accept this decision with grace, Kashyapa began to plot. He gathered around himself a circle of ambitious courtiers and disaffected nobles who whispered poison in his ears about his father's supposed weakness and his brother's inadequacy. What happened next would shock the civilized world and set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately lead to one of history's most dramatic confrontations. In a palace coup that stunned even his supporters with its brutality, Kashyapa seized his father and, in an act of unthinkable cruelty, had the elderly king walled up alive in a chamber beneath the palace. The murder of Kashyapa sent shockwaves throughout the kingdom. Moggallana, fearing for his own life, fled to India, where he began gathering support for his eventual return. The Buddhist clergy, horrified by the patricide, withdrew their blessing from the new king. Even Kashyapa's own supporters began to question whether they had backed the right horse. Realizing that his position in the traditional capital was untenable, Kashyapa made a decision that would define his entire reign. He would abandon Anuradhapura and create an entirely new seat of power, one that would be impregnable to his enemies and serve as a testament to his divine right to rule. His eyes fell upon Sigiriya. The massive red rock rose nearly 600 feet above the surrounding jungle, its sheer walls seeming to mock any would-be attacker. But Kashyapa saw beyond its forbidding exterior. He envisioned a fortress palace that would surpass anything the ancient world had ever witnessed. This would not merely be a defensive stronghold, but a divine residence that would legitimize his blood-stained ascent to power. Construction began immediately, and what followed was an engineering marvel that defied comprehension. Thousands of workers swarmed the rock like ants, carving staircases into solid stone, creating vast water gardens at its base, and somehow hauling massive blocks of granite to the summit through ingenuity that still puzzles modern engineers. The scale of the undertaking was breathtaking. Entire villages were relocated to provide labour, and the royal treasury was emptied ambitious building projects in Sri to fund the most Lankan history. The centrepiece of Kashyapa's vision was the Lion Gate, a colossal stone lion whose mouth served as the entrance to the upper palace. Visitors had to literally walk through the jaws of the beast to reach the king, a psychological masterstroke that reinforced his power while simultaneously reflecting his paranoid state of mind. The lion's paws, carved from living rock, still guard the entrance today, though the massive head has long since crumbled away. But perhaps the most extraordinary feature of Sigiriya was not its architecture, but its art. Halfway up the western face of the rock, Kashyapa commissioned a series of frescoes that would become legendary throughout the ancient world. These paintings depicted celestial maidens, their bodies adorned with jewels and silk, their faces radiating an otherworldly beauty that seemed to transcend mortal artistry. The pigments used were so advanced that many of these frescoes retain their vibrant colours even today, 15 centuries after they were created. The water gardens surrounding the base of the rock were equally impressive, featuring sophisticated hydraulic systems that created fountains, pools and cascades that functioned perfectly during the monsoon seasons. These were not mere decorative elements but served practical purposes, cooling the air, providing fresh water to the fortress, and creating additional barriers against potential attackers. Yet, for all its splendour, Sigiriya was born from fear. Every element of its design reflected Kashyapa's deep-seated terror of retribution. The single narrow staircase to the summit could be easily defended by a handful of men. The palace walls were positioned to provide panoramic views of all approaches. Hidden passages and escape routes were built throughout the structure, allowing the king to vanish at a moment's notice if danger threatened. As the years passed, Kashyapa's paranoia only intensified. He surrounded himself with an elaborate court that rivaled anything in India or China, yet he trusted no one completely. Spies and informants watched his every move, reporting not just on external threats, but on the loyalty of his own courtiers. The king who had murdered his father lived in constant fear that his own subordinates might one day turn against him. Meanwhile, in the courts of southern India, Moggallana was patiently building his strength. The rightful heir to the throne had not forgotten his brother's betrayal, nor had he abandoned his claim to the crown. With each passing year, his army grew larger and more disciplined. The Buddhist monasteries that had condemned Kashyapa's patricide provided both moral support and practical assistance to the exile's cause. The confrontation that would determine the fate of both brothers and the kingdom itself was drawing ever closer. In 495 AD, after 18 years of self-imposed exile atop his rocky throne, Kashyapa's worst fears finally materialized. Moggallana returned with a formidable army, and the final confrontation between the brothers would unfold on the plains below Sigiriya. Despite commanding superior numbers and holding the ultimate defensive position, Kashyapa made a decision that shocked his generals. He abandoned his impregnable fortress and rode out to meet his brother in open battle. Some historians suggest this was an act of desperate courage, a king finally ready to face his destiny. Others argue it was the final manifestation of a mind consumed by paranoia and guilt. When his war elephant suddenly turned during the heat of battle, his own soldiers mistook it for retreat. In that moment of confusion, seeing his men begin to waver, Kashyapa drew his dagger and took his own life rather than face capture. The king, who had murdered his father to claim a crown, died by his own hand, bringing to a close one of history's most tragic tales of ambition and paranoia. Moggallana reclaimed his rightful throne, but the magnificent palace fortress was abandoned, left to the jungle and the passage of time. Today, Sigiriya stands as both a testament to human achievement and a haunting reminder of how power obtained through betrayal ultimately destroys those who wield it. Kashyapa's legacy endures not in the crown he stole, but in the extraordinary monument he created, a lasting symbol of both the heights of human creativity and the depths of human folly. The Lion Rock remains eternal and unchanging, while the king who built it has become nothing more than a whisper in the wind.